The Shadow War, Trump's escalating onslaught against cocaine empires in Venezuela and the imminent threat to Colombia.
In the roiling expanse of the Caribbean Sea, where azure waves mask the deadly undercurrents of international intrigue, President Donald Trump's revitalized war on drugs has erupted into a spectacle of military might and diplomatic discord. As of October 25, 2025, the U.S. has executed at least 10 lethal strikes on suspected drug smuggling vessels originating from South America, resulting in 43 fatalities, including a recent assault in the eastern Pacific Ocean that claimed 5 lives aboard boats allegedly tied to Colombian cartels. The deployment of the USS Gerald R. Ford, the pinnacle of American naval power, underscores a shift from mere interdictions to a broader offensive, with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announcing operations that now encompass the Pacific Theater and hint at impending land incursions.
Trump's ominous declaration, "Land is going to be next," echoes through diplomatic channels, evoking fears of drone strikes on jungle labs deep in Venezuelan territory. This campaign, purportedly aimed at dismantling cocaine production networks, veils a multifaceted agenda: regime destabilization in Caracas, assertion of hemispheric dominance, and a domestic political theater to rally supporters against the poison infiltrating U.S. borders.
This expanded essay dissects Trump's Venezuela strategy as a volatile fusion of anti-narcotics fervor and geopolitical maneuvering, drawing on fresh revelations from intelligence leaks and regional analyses. It scrutinizes how the drug war pretext facilitates broader ambitions, such as access to Venezuela's vast oil reserves amid global energy tensions. Turning southward, we evaluate the escalating peril for Colombia, the world's cocaine powerhouse, where sanctions on President Gustavo Petro signal a prelude to potential military action. Incorporating recent developments, like Petro's legal countermeasures in U.S. courts and threats of U.S. aid cuts, we assess a dramatic, heart-stopping 70% probability of U.S. strikes on Colombian production sites, up from prior estimates due to intensified Pacific operations targeting Colombian vessels. Bolstered by historical precedents, expert insights, and practical advice for affected communities, this analysis probes the human and strategic costs. In a fentanyl-ravaged America, where cocaine plays a secondary role in overdoses, does this bombardment address root causes, or merely perpetuate a cycle of exported violence and regional instability?
Historical precedents, a legacy of futile interventions and unintended consequences. Trump's offensive is not an isolated thunderclap but a resonant echo of America's protracted, trillion-dollar war on drugs, a policy labyrinth riddled with failures and moral ambiguities. Initiated by Nixon in 1971 as a mechanism for social control, it escalated under Reagan with operations like Just Cause in Panama, where U.S. forces ousted Manuel Noriega under the guise of drug interdiction, only to see cocaine flows reroute through more resilient networks. Clinton's Plan Colombia, a $10 billion endeavor from 2000 onward, exemplifies the pitfalls. Aerial herbicide sprays decimated 1.2 million hectares of coca but triggered environmental catastrophes, including contaminated water sources that sickened thousands in rural communities and displaced over 4 million people amid intensified guerrilla warfare. Production merely migrated to Peru and Bolivia, with global cocaine output tripling by 2020 despite the onslaught.
In Trump's first term, Operation Gideon, a botched 2020 mercenary plot to topple Maduro, previewed his Venezuela fixation, blending drug accusations with sanctions that crippled the economy, exacerbating migration crises. Now, in 2025, the strategy intensifies amid a fentanyl epidemic claiming 110,000 U.S. lives annually, largely from Chinese-sourced precursors via Mexican labs, rendering cocaine a mere 12% of overdose fatalities. Yet Trump's narrative frames Latin America as the epicenter, with Hegseth's briefings to Congress emphasizing transnational criminal organizations to sidestep war authorizations. Additional materials from think tanks like the Sofan Center warn of a slippery slope toward full-scale cartel wars, citing Mexico's 2006 Merida Initiative, where U.S.-backed operations led to 400,000 deaths and fragmented cartels into hyper-violent splinter groups. These examples illuminate the blowback. Interventions often amplify resilience, as seen when Colombian cartels adapted post-Escobar by decentralizing into micro-trafficking cells.
Venezuela, Maritime Mayhem as Prelude to Terrestrial Assault, a detailed dissection. The campaign's genesis traces to September 2025, with U.S. Navy and Coast Guard forces unleashing strikes on narco-subs and go-fast boats in international waters, sinking vessels purportedly carrying Venezuelan processed cocaine destined for U.S. markets. A pivotal October 22 incident in the Pacific saw 5 alleged smugglers killed, with Hegseth justifying it as targeting vessels carrying substantial narcotics. Trump amplified the drama on social media. Another victory against the poison peddlers, our military is unstoppable. Leaked Pentagon documents reveal deliberations over inland targets, cocaine refineries in the Orinoco Basin and Guarico State, where Maduro's alleged cartel of the Suns processes up to 400 metric tons yearly, often in collusion with FARC dissidents. Options include Reaper drone swarms launched from the Gerald R. Ford, navigating around Venezuela's Russian-supplied S-400 defenses.
Maduro's retort accuses the U.S. of fabricating a war to seize oil, a claim bolstered by Venezuela's 304 billion barrels in reserves, which could alleviate U.S. dependencies amid Middle East volatility. UNOC data underscores the mismatch. Venezuelan coca cultivation hovers below 2,000 hectares, positioning it as a transit hub rather than producer, with most product Colombian-sourced. Civilian risks are acute, labs intersperse with Guareo indigenous villages, and past fumigations have caused birth defects and crop failures. A 2025 WALA report projects 150,000 displacements from strikes, fueling northward migrations that contradict Trump's border crackdowns.
Advice for Venezuelan residents. In regions like Delta Amacuro or Bolivar, communities should prioritize emergency preparedness, stockpile non-perishable food and water for 72 hours, establish neighborhood watch systems for early warnings via community radios, and document any military sightings to share with human rights groups like Previa. Advocate through legal channels, petition the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and diversify livelihoods away from informal economies tied to border trade. Examples from 2019 protests show that collective resilience, such as mutual aid networks, can mitigate humanitarian fallout.
Colombia, from sanctions to strikes, a dramatic 70% probability of cataclysm. Colombia, forging 1,500 metric tons of cocaine annually from 250,000 hectares of coca, stands as the hemisphere's narcotics nexus, with production spiking 25% under Petro's administration due to suspended aerial eradications and total peace negotiations with ELN and Clan del Golfo. Trump's response: Treasury sanctions on September 15, 2025, designating Petro a major drug facilitator on the Clinton list, freezing assets and imposing visa bans, accusing him of allowing explosive output that floods U.S. streets. Petro counters with record 600-ton seizures in 2025 and vows U.S. court challenges, decrying the moves as genocidal and ineffective, while threatening to pivot aid toward BRICS nations. Trump escalates with tariffs and aid termination announcements, framing a narco-trinity. Colombia produces, Venezuela transits, Mexico distributes. Recent Pacific strikes, including one on a vessel with Colombian survivors suffering head trauma, strain the alliance, with Petro slamming them as illegal theatrics.
The dramatic probability of U.S. military strikes on Colombian sites, labs in Nariño, Cauca, and Norte de Santander now stands at a vertigo-inducing 70%, elevated by Trump's expansion to Colombian origin targets and Hegseth's regional rhetoric. This assessment factors in 85% odds of further sanctions and aid cuts, $450 million yearly, tempered by Colombia's 60,000 U.S. trained troops and OAS backlash risks, but spiked by potential triggers like a cartel retaliation on U.S. assets. Expert analyses from Newsweek and Al Jazeera highlight Trump's new Latin strategy as interventionist, potentially simulating attacks via bomber exercises.
Advice for Colombian residents. In coca-heavy zones like Putumayo, locals should form community alert systems using apps like WhatsApp for real-time updates on military movements, and collaborate with NGOs like De Justicia for legal protections against forced displacements. Diversify income through government-subsidized crop alternatives like cacao or coffee, as in Petro's Peace Fields pilots, which have transitioned 10,000 farmers since 2023. Examples from 1990s fumigations underscore health precautions. Use masks during potential aerial ops and monitor water sources for contaminants.
Broader ramifications, human costs, geopolitical fractures, and the illusion of victory. The Crusade's toll is staggering. $4 billion monthly for deployments diverts from U.S. treatment programs that could reduce overdoses by 60% via evidence-based models like Portugal's decriminalization. Geopolitically, it fractures alliances. Brazil's Lula condemns Yankee imperialism, while Mexico warns of retaliatory tariffs. Human ledger, strikes orphan families and toxify ecosystems, with Venezuelan refugees swelling to 8 million. Provocatively, hegemony may be the real addiction. U.S. consumption drives 35% of global cocaine demand, yet blame externalizes via firepower. Additional insights from Politico reveal oil as the undercurrent, with strikes potentially paving Exxon investments.
Conclusion: a powder keg primed for explosion. Trump's Venezuelan barrage, now spilling into Colombian waters, portends a hemispheric inferno, with a 70% strike probability on Colombia, a clarion of chaos. Yet the war's $1.5 trillion legacy has decupled production, birthing adaptive horrors. Ultimate provocation. In demolishing labs, do we conquer vice or ignite fiercer resistances? Until America introspects its appetites, Latin America's fields will regenerate, and the shadow war consumes the vulnerable in its unrelenting blaze.